Welcome back, everybody. I'm Chuck Beaver, and this is The Writing Wasn't Very Good, my web series dedicated to helping you avoid the pitfalls of video game writing. Interactive media. The protagonist grabs the camera and runs away. How to write main story anyway. In novels, TV, or film, old traditional linear media, you controlled everything. The lens, the cut, the pacing, the focus. In games, the new interactive media, the character grabs the camera and runs away. Suddenly, all your classic tools vanish. No cuts, no timing, no control of attention or flow. And yet, you still need to achieve the same narrative architecture. Inciting incidents, act turns, tension, escalation, release. So, how do we pull that off? We rebuild our toolbox from the materials of interactivity. And what are those? Let's dive in. So it turns out that your game's genre dictates the type of narrative tools you will have. This runs on a spectrum from basically a film with a few buttons to This is Witchcraft. On one end, we have linear games, the closest to traditional media. Their mission flow gives you control over timing, framing, and location, the bedrock of camera language. This means we get most of the control back that we used to have. Pacing, focus, attention, flow. This is doubly true if the game has full cutscenes, which are just little pieces of the old media zipped right up into the new one. Open world games. Okay, here we go. This is the other side of the spectrum and the worst of all worlds for writers. No linearity, no camera, no cuts, no pacing, no control of information flow, nothing. Designing story here is not like film anymore. It's more like building an amusement park, where you can't force attention, you have to seduce it. And narrative structure has to come from somewhere other than camera tricks. You've got to hijack the medium's own systems and repurpose them for story. Skills, items, and abilities, these become our secret plot gates. Skills ensure that you can't pick the lock of the door to Act 2 until you have that skill. And the requirements to acquire that skill thread you through all of the Act 1 beats. Ta-da! Items. Same deal. You don't get the key, you don't get through the door, or into Act 2. Every step to get the key takes you through the Act 1 beats. Ta-da again. Abilities. In Control, Jesse's powers are story keys. Levitate isn't optional, it's required to enter missions like the ashtray maze. So story progression and ability progression become the same thing. We have some other levers as well. There is level gating. Think of World of Warcraft. Sure, you can walk into the next level, but you'll get murked. Like you're too low level and you'll just get killed. So it's harsh, but effective. Then there's the super inelegant way of just a fourth wall breaking message on the screen that says, if you enter this area and push this button, you will start Act 2. Like Baldur's Gate 3 does that. So it literally announces the narrative structure on the screen. Inelegant, but also effective. And while I kept saying Act 2, these gates can achieve any narrative beat. Inciting incident, antagonist reveal, escalation, climax, denouement, all of it. So mechanics are how you take a sprawling playground and sculpt it into a 3-act play. Another genre is roguelikes. Think of Hades. Hades is genius because it wires the story into the loop of dying and retrying. Every time you crawl out of the underworld, it's not just another run, it's another chapter. You bump into characters you've seen before, you meet new ones, and each conversation remembers where you left off. So what looks like endless repetition is actually a disguised act structure. Every death moves relationships forward, escalates tensions, and layers on revelations. That is meta-progression in its purest form. The story isn't in between runs, it is the runs. Let's talk about a few more tricks and trip-ups waiting for us in interactive media. First of all, mission objectives. Mission objectives are our secret super weapon. They aren't just arbitrary tasks. They link player actions to narrative consequences. How? By marrying the game's physical verbs to narrative's mental verbs. Physical verbs are things like shoot, strike, steal, collect, run, build. Mental verbs are things like betray, avenge, deceive, expose, trust, corrupt. The trick, of course, that links them is context. A single button press can be a plot turn if it results in narrative consequences. Here's an example. In an earlier episode, I talked about a king who destroys a rebel supply bridge to crush an uprising. As long as the bridge stays broken, the king holds power. But if you rebuild it, you have betrayed the king and sided with the rebels. That is plot, delivered through objectives. Games have incredible ways to foreshadow that linear media cannot touch. Take Zelda, Tears of the Kingdom. From the opening, you can see the Act 3 set piece, the castle looming in the center of the map. It's always there, haunting you, but completely blocked by level gates and progression blockers until you're ready. Tutorials don't have to be obvious and boring. They can be exciting and carry story. Think of it like writing dialogue subtext. Here, the text is the tutorial lesson, and the subtext is the narrative casing. Example, Half-Life 2's opening. A guard forces you to pick up trash and throw it away before he lets you pass. On the surface, you're just learning pick up object, drop object. But underneath, you just lived dystopia. Your first taste of authoritarian humiliation. One action, two layers. The tutorial sticks because it's not just teaching, it's story. Dark Night of the Soul. How to dodge the ludonarrative dissonance of this. What is the dissonance here? So narratively, the hero's lowest point should happen near the end of the story right before the climax. The biggest moment of despair and failure and loss. Mechanically, though, that's usually when the player is right at their strongest. Maxed out gear, full arsenal, peak skill sets. That's just abject dissonance. Some games try to square this by stripping away weapons. Metroid does this constantly. But you don't need to nerf the player. Instead, hit them where the mechanics don't have to suffer. Relationships, trust, goals, identity. At their darkest narrative moment, they're still physically unstoppable, but emotionally broken. So that's how you can make the Dark Knight land without breaking your game. Mute protagonists. Good luck with this. This is possibly the single biggest perversion ever inflicted on narrative design. There is no story ever in the history of story where the main character, for no endemic reason, just decides to not speak, even though he or she can. It is a legacy design carry forward that has a nearly religious following. Some people cannot literally imagine how they could ever enjoy a game where the main character isn't them, requiring it to be a blank cipher into which they can project themselves. This is utterly unique to interactive media and will probably never die out. So where did this come from? Well, it started with some early technical shackles. The early gaming hardware simply couldn't handle it, meaning CPUs and GPUs simply couldn't afford to render a full player character model on the screen in real time. So we were forced into first-person only games at the very beginning, with no representation of the player avatar. Audio storage was tiny. A voiced protagonist would have eaten your entire CD-ROM or floppy disk. So the ultimate outcome there is a blank first-person view with no voice. And then of course we had the immersion dogma. The whole idea of interactive media is that you are there. Thus, a mute protagonist would avoid any dissonance naturally. There would be no personality to conflict with the player's projection. And then genre overlap. Early shooters leaned into the military simulation authenticity. Wolfenstein's World War II soldiers, Doom's Marine, GoldenEye's Bond, and later Medal of Honor. Soldiers don't stop mid-firefight for some banter, so the silence fit the fantasy. So what started as necessity hardened into dogma. The voiceless cipher as the first-person shooter standard. But as the tech improved, the silence started to crack. Developers pushed protagonists into frame and gave them a voice, and suddenly they felt human. Dead Space is the perfect case study. Isaac Clarke was mute in the first game, a total cipher. But in Dead Space 2, we gave him a voice. And the remake retroactively confirmed that was the right call. So the silence was never sacred, it was a technical hack and limitation that we took for a design principle. So interactive fiction is a whole new ballgame. The old tools, camera, cuts, pacing, are gone. But if you understand your game's genre and the tool sets that it gives you, you can still hit all the classic narrative beats: inciting incident, escalation, climax, resolution. The trick is building them with the materials that the game actually gives you. You made it! That's all for this episode. Like and subscribe if you're enjoying this content, and we'll see you next time.